Thanks, guys. We're almost there. So I wanted to do a quick primer before we bring Mike in. And we've spent the day hearing a lot about what's new, what's coming, the future. It's almost exhausting, right? When you think about just what was covered today, there was a lot about commerce, there was a lot about video, there was a lot about AI, but there's three things that always remain constant. Right? The infusion and the constant evolution of technology and this can't stop, won't stop pace, that's been true since we've all entered this profession. In a related way, that means consumer behaviors are always kind of changing because as human beings, we adapt to the changes around us. Right? And those two things combined create the emergence of new platforms, new channels, new content formats that open up avenues for us to reach consumers in new places or new ways. Those things are always the same. Once upon a time, when I was a baby performance person, mobile was all the rage. Right? It was growing really fast. There was specialists built around it, and now we don't talk about it anymore because essentially all of the things and the principles that were created with the birth of this thing called mobile has become part of all media as we know it. Right? We don't talk about mobile search anymore. Search is mobile. We don't talk about mobile social. We never talked about mobile social. Right? The things that we take for granted today, the way we trigger dynamic creative based on proximity, even weather, some of the concepts that live in commerce existed because of mobile, but we don't call it that anymore. Speaking of, we're about 3 years away from commerce, specifically e-commerce, being 1 out of every $5 spent. Commerce is already the space where there's a lot of attention in the US right now. Right? It's a specialized field. We talk about how fast it's growing. But in reality, commerce was also never one thing. It's a set of principles and a set of capabilities that's starting to permeate part of everything we do as marketing and media practitioners. How do I know this? It's about to follow the exact same pattern mobile did, right? We reached an inflection point, we're past the inflection point, and you're about to see commerce sort of start dissipating from our everyday moniker. Right? How do I know this? Last week, some of you may or may not have noticed that we had, not that I'm a huge football fan, but we had what I hear was a very popular football game on Prime, where you were shown quarterly, on a quarterly basis, these big Black Friday deals that you could activate and redeem through a QR code on your mobile phone. Now, if you really think about it, what was this? Was this a video execution? Was it a commerce execution? Was it even a mobile execution? And the conclusion is, you gotta let that go, right? We love kind of like classifying things in neat little buckets because it's easier for us to place them in the buckets we want them to, but consumers don't experience it that way. And the most important thing is, especially those of you on the brand side, marketers know, it's not like new money is being created to feed these new things. You're taking money out of different places to shift into new areas. So you have to have an understanding of what it is that is augmenting or supplementing or even replacing. So how do we move forward in this new world order? Number one, this has been really, really important for me, and I hope it will be for you guys in the future. Whenever you see something new, it is important to incubate it as a new capability. Take it, protect it, let it grow, let it flourish as its own thing, but plan for integration the moment it's born. You guys saw the charts. the comparison between mobile and commerce, you will start noticing that right inflection point where you now have to bring it back to the mothership and make the capability part of everything you do. Sure. Now, we talked about the inflection point, right? Now, what is preventing us, let's use commerce as an example. What is preventing us from integrating that into everything that we do and the way we plan, optimize, and learn from? There's not a common currency right now that allows you to do a true apples-to-apples comparison, whether that's a common currency for describing audiences, or outcomes, or attribution. We accept that. Right? We accept, oh, we can't do it that way in this new space because it doesn't exist. Well, this room represents a lot of influence over our own industry. Push for it, right? Ask for it. You ask for it often enough, and if you ask for it collectively, surely it will materialize sooner or later. And then the third theme is obvious, mostly because you've seen the slide already, but this is where human ingenuity has to come in. It doesn't matter how many machines are born to make media smarter and better. Develop a hypothesis around what these new things will do and how it will change the way we work, test it, validate it, refine it, and repeat. And most of all, for us as a media agency, once upon a time we used to be the folks who really specialize in how to place your messages in the right places. Today, the big thing we're talking about, especially with the rise of things like commerce that allows us to get closer to business outcomes, is how do we change who we are and our role as somebody who can talk to you about business outcomes and not just media KPIs. So with that, Mike, you're about to ask me more about business KPIs.
It's a great start, plus it's like 10 minutes less that I have to filibuster for our time together. Hello everyone, my name is Mike Dupree. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at Teads. For those who might not know, Teads is a global omnichannel platform. We partner with very premium content providers and publishers across the open web and across connected TV and connect brands to those environments across the full funnel. Speaking of the full funnel, we're going to go towards sort of the middle and lower part of the funnel today for our conversation around performance, sort of where we are and where we're going. And you know, there couldn't be anybody better to talk to than Ji, given her background in the area. So before I get into any first questions, you know, we know you're at Nexus. Do you want to give just a bit of background for those folks who haven't come across you in their careers? You've sort of grown up with this part of the industry, so no better thought leader in this area.
Mike happens to be one of those people who knew me when I was a baby performance person. Nexus is really the central performance engine for GroupM and our agencies. So it is, I'm very proud to say, the only place where we've brought together all of the biddable capabilities across search, social, programmatic, commerce, tech consulting, influencer, and content under one roof. Why? Because we just talked about it. Integration and the magic in between those spaces is what's really going to unlock that special sauce. So we've been on this journey, I want to say, less than 2 years.
Yeah. And Ji, you know, when we kind of spoke prior to our conversation today, we talked about performance. The first thing we think about is sort of that last touch point, the point of acquisition, as kind of the end-all, be-all, and what we focus on. But you sort of think of performance as a larger sort of state of mind in our industry. Do you want to elaborate on that notion, kind of how you're thinking about it, and how you instill it with your clients and your team?
I love that question. So there's nothing wrong with acquisition. There's a certain level of certainty, and there's almost a satisfaction with kind of acquisition, especially when you look at very performance-led clients. But when you really think about it, performance is really the confidence to quantify the impact of every dollar spent, right? We're not there yet, but that's the constant pursuit of needing to quantify that and optimize that across every dollar, whether it's media or not, is really what performance is becoming.
And we're in a we're in a macroeconomic climate where accounting for every dollar matters more. We also came out of a pandemic in 2020 that kind of caused us to rethink how we account for every dollar. Do you want to talk about, that springboard into where we are now? We, sort of to look ahead, sometimes we have to look to the past and learn from it. When the pandemic hit in Q2 of 2020, really, we had to rethink a lot of what we were doing. Talk about your experience wherever you were at that time and how you worked with brands and got through that time and how they challenged you to plan and invest differently.
It's interesting. I love that you reminded me. I had just started, the month we went into lockdown, I had just started a new role at a less exciting place than GroupM Nexus. But it was in a role that was not intended to be specifically dedicated to performance. But the month I arrived, we won't go into lockdown, and we have almost an overnight change in conversation with our clients, because obviously you guys all remember that feeling of uncertainty and not knowing what was going to happen. So remember what I said about the beauty of acquisition. There's certainty in kind of numerical certainty in what every dollar does. So it felt like every client wanted to kind of turn their attention to how much certainty can I have and how much certain can you be about the rest. So my role naturally kind of like shifted back almost overnight to, well, I used to be a performance person, so I think we can figure this out. Right? Now, we are in a bit of a different era, but very similar in certain ways. We talked a lot, especially this year, about the softness of the economy. I've seen more brands that have embraced the notion of digital growth performance on the marketer side, and really senior titles kind of materializing in our industry around this concept. So there's two things. One, we know how to do this because we had to do it overnight like 2 years ago. So we definitely know how to do this. The second thing is we have partners now on our brand side who are coming along this journey with us. And honestly, right now, when we talk about performance and the numeric certainty of things, it's not that bad. This is kind of nice. We're talking about, a lot of the conversations are talking about growth, right? Growth in audiences, growth in categories, growth in their share. That's a really nice, aggressive conversation to have.
It's brand performance. It's like, it's not just the outcome, it's sort of the state of the industry at the moment, right? Okay, so let's talk about the mid-funnel as part of the customer journey. So, we know that most brands or content companies or streaming companies or OEMs, they want to drive conversion, they want to drive sales, but in order to do that, they need to drive consideration, they need to drive habituation. But it's hard to overlook where that happens. So when you talk about that part of the journey, content and context in that content matter a lot. How are you thinking about that when you're talking to your team, working with your clients, the contextual relevance of the message and where brands need to kind of build around that to be successful?
So it's funny you say that. First of all, the mid-funnel has always been there. We just never formalized it, right? So whether it's your brand dollars kind of doing a little extra push to woo somebody, or is your performance dollars reaching up to find audiences that are not yet sold on you, we've always been kind of doing it, right? But the most important thing that distinguishes what a mid-funnel really is, whether it's about and what content and context is right for that, to strengthen the mid-funnel really comes down to the audience, right? So I'm not going to use a dating analogy because I feel like
yes, you are.
No. You've known me for too long.
It's almost 4 o'clock.
Yeah.
We can you can go for it.
So there's going to be there's kind of, when you think about especially modern dating, thank God I'm not single anymore. But like there's going to be people who are predisposed to you already, right? So like that is a very different plan. Right, when you plan for a date and you already know this chick likes you, that's a very different mindset. When you plan for a date and you pretty sure this chick likes somebody else, that's a completely different plan, right? Content and context will be very different in those two instances, right? It's the same thing for brands and the same thing for consumer experiences. Some audiences are already familiar with you. They've probably experienced you before. They're likely to come back. You know what will make them come back. Some people are in the category, as in they are dating. They might be dating somebody else. You know kind of what you have to do. Some people are not in the category at all. We talk a lot, for example, about Gen Z and how to kind of grow kind of the next generation of consumers. That's a completely different experience that you have to deliver, and mostly you have to invest the time, right, and gather enough insights to prime, right, for entry into the category. If you kind of break down these things into very human, common sense kind of logic, we kind of already know what to do when we talk about the mid-funnel.
Yeah, the predisposition piece is everything. And so understanding it's incumbent upon brands and agencies to work together and understand what their audiences are, how they segment it, who's predisposed, at which kind of part, how far along on the dating journey are we with this individual, and then cater the messaging to them. That makes total sense. So let's flip to creative. Creative, when we talk about acquisition, sometimes it gets maybe overlooked. It's probably the most important variable to perform. But it takes a lot of work to understand what that means, right? So can you talk about how you think about creative optimization or the role creative plays in performance media, both on the front end, but also what it does kind of back end, or if you're able to be sophisticated enough to measure some of the LTV metrics that you're working on for your brand.
So when we talk about creative, and especially addressable creative, the temptation, we talked a little bit about generative AI, it's a hot topic these days. The temptation is really to talk about the front-end capabilities that technology is really transforming. Look at what we can do to dynamically assemble a piece of creative in real time. The reason why we haven't really pushed this hard enough is because we haven't really cracked the ability to extract all of the data that comes back from creative performance, right, and compile it in a way that is easily digested and actionable, right? So it always comes back to, well, the yellow does better than the blue. I don't know what that means, right? I don't know how that is making us smarter about reaching consumers and kind of nurturing them through the funnel. There's also kind of the way to look at KPIs that has to do with media, but especially deadly for creative. We tend to optimize in such a single dimension way. So this creative is the highest performer. Why? Well, it converts the best. But why does it convert the best? Now, if you look really carefully and go take a look at any sample campaign, you'll find two patterns. You typically have creative or a combination of sequences that do really, really well on front-end metrics, like really high response rate, attention rates, but don't necessarily convert right away. Then you have another batch where the front end is the main, right? But once people interact with it or they have viewed it sufficiently, they convert. Now, the reason why these two perform well are very different. And ideally, if you're a smart practitioner, you want to pair the two and sequence them next to each other as much as possible. We don't do that because it's hard to do, right? So it's not so much about how sexy the front-end creative is, it's the ingenuity with which you assemble them in the right order. And those tools are not really kind of at scale or at prevalent as I wish.
Yeah, it's not easy. Show of hands in the room. If you're on the buy side or the sell side, are you working across performance media? For a show of hands. All right, so we have brand innovators, but as we've established, performance is now, every dollar has to be accounted for. So we're running into these things, and it's not easy to solve some of these challenges, particularly creative optimization, understanding what's performing best and why. But it's something that, as we look into 2024, we need to continue to challenge ourselves to do. Part of what's making that hard is signal loss. So just, it's what we're dealing with now. It's going to continue into 2024. We are continuing to prepare for the deprecation of cookies across the industry on web. We are 2 years into dealing with iOS 14.5 and SK Ad Network and the a bit of signal loss on the measurement side with an app. We have government regulations, depending on what state you're in, that are asking us to do things and jump through hoops. So it's becoming harder to build audiences and find them. It's been becoming even harder to measure success. How are you, Gia, at Nexus right now, thinking about where it's been and also where we're headed next year, and preparing yourself and your client roster to still find success when we can know less?
Thank you, because now I get to do a plug for our brethren at Choreograph, but so we have a slightly different philosophy. So we've been very, very kind of addicted to identities and deterministic signals for a really long time. And why is that? Because deterministic signals in certain ways makes the performance person a little bit lazy, right? Like it fires, you know exactly what happened, you can get it down to the individual level, it's pretty straightforward. We think of it as an element, but not the spine. And if you look at what's been happening recently, it almost signals a golden era for true performance lovers, because the world is kind of coming down to models. May the best model win, right? If you look at what's happening with iOS, it was the first signal that rather than identities, use a model to determine what is working and what's not working. Because all it's saying is it's not that we're not going to tell you what's working. We are only going to tell it to you if you have a statistically big enough group that you can reverse engineer it into a person. Is that hard? I don't think that's a hard threshold. The world we live in, whether it's the modernization of MMM or it is the propensities in certain geolocations, these are all principles that were built on models. We know how to do this. We birthed the MMM guys. So I think kind of what signal loss is directing us to is really kind of rebuilding a craft around data and data sciences rather than rely on identities, deterministic signals, and honestly, a little bit of laziness.
It's back to the future a little bit. But again, it's something that we've dealt with in a different way and we can prepare for in the future. I think the point on MMM is interesting, right? I mean, MMM is evolving a lot. It's reintroduced itself in a lot of ways. You can talk about how you've seen it happen with your own client roster, and it's more frequent, right? The feedback loop of an MMM used to take a really long time, and it's hard to action upon it, especially in digital and performance. Now that sort of loop has condensed, right? And so we're able to get our learnings a bit more quickly.
So, I mean, I think most people are using some variation of it. We certainly have one. It used to be that MMM was this thing that you had to wait for 2 years of data, and then it would be an annual output, and it was backwards looking, so it was great for insights, but you couldn't action anything on it. Now, kind of because we have machine learning, we have modern tools, we have a ton of data coming in from platforms, we're finally in a digital-first era, right? The cadence has kind of collapsed down to monthly. So like the initial model build only takes a quarter, right? The updates is monthly. That's frequent enough for us to action on, especially when it comes to big decisions. The platforms will still drive a lot of the real-time optimizations. We certainly live in that world, but the combination of those two things exists today, right? So the signal loss should not be a barrier for us in continuing kind of the same principles that we've tested, validated, and confirmed as tried and true.
Okay, we're coming up on time. I'm going to ask one more question unrelated to performance media because we're getting into the weeds here, and I know it's almost 4 o'clock, but I'd love to have everyone's, like, if you have questions, I want to save 1 or 2 minutes, 3 minutes to take questions from the audience, so be thinking about it. Let me zoom out for a bit. This is very general, but I always like to try to incorporate different topics into conversations like this. So you're a leader of a team, you have been for a long time. We have a lot of leaders in this room, we have aspiring leaders in this room. What is the best leadership advice you've been given, or maybe leadership principle that you try to live and operate by that we can take away and remember and think about tomorrow when we've tried to retain a lot of this information today?
It's been consistent. I've been actually asked this question recently, and somebody in this room will know where this is from. I once asked a female leader, somebody who had just become a CEO of an agency, like, how did she get to her role? And she said, well, I would look at something, and if I felt like I could do it better, I wouldn't ask for credit, I wouldn't ask for permission, I would just do it. And I live and die by that. I think that's just such a great way to build your career, because you have no idea where it's going to take you.
Like that. Let me spend the last minute or two looking to you all to see if anybody has any questions that you want to ask G. Don't ask me, ask G. Yes?
Thank you for that terrific panel. I wanted to ask a question about, you talked about brand marketers and performance marketers. You talked about brand budgets and performance budgets. Do you see a world where that bifurcation slowly goes away and we become marketers with multiple jobs and tasks to do, but the free reign to be able to work across our arsenal of tools to deliver on our goals?
Such a great question, because because it's exactly that. While I consider myself and GroupM Nexus a performance organization, obviously we don't only work on acquisition, right? But I do find that we solve the same problem with different skill sets. And one of the things that I learned when I was early on, and I was like, actually, Mike, when you and I first met, is within, for example, the same social team, there are folks who are get really excited about like high impact, experiential, social executions, and then there are social people who really nerd out about the numbers. And these two skill sets are not interchangeable, right? But if you point them towards like the same task and say, I need you to crack growth in, for example, this music genre, I need you to lift it by X%, these two skill sets will come together, solve it very differently, but we'll do it together. Right? So there is a distinction in what it is that you are good at, but it shouldn't be, I think you're right, it shouldn't be a distinction that comes down to budgets, for example.
Okay. I think we're at time. Let me just close with a couple of takeaways that I learned today, and hopefully we can, again, remember a day or two from now, because we are absorbing a lot today. To me, the things that stood out, sort of performance as a way of operating today, whether you are dealing with brands or performance or anything in between, dollars being accounted for, sort of the new way, the concept of brand performance, that everything needs to put out an outcome. I think it was interesting to hear your thoughts on propensity and sort of the analogy to dating when you're talking about audiences and how to find them and where in the funnel to serve the right message to them. I thought the creative optimization piece was interesting to understand, okay, we need to understand what the front end metrics are, but also work hard to ensure that those also flow through to the ultimate outcome that the brand wants. And then of course, from a leadership standpoint, act the part whether someone's looking and whether they're not looking. And that'll serve you well in the long run. So G, thank you so much. This is awesome. Good to be with you.
Good to see you.